Good afternoon to everybody. Well, I heard many things today, and I remember years ago we had a group in Europe. We were meeting every 6 months. There was Vesprilla, was a Professor Sykes from Oxford, François Lemaire in France, Peter Suter, Lamy, all people that make some contribution in the field. And I remember when I had the first results on extracorporeal removal in the 80s, I went to Professor Sykes and said, well, kid, we have these results. He looked at me and he said, I'm not interested at all in outcome. I'm interested in mechanism. Well, now that I am older than Professor Sykes, I reach more or less the same conclusion. When you hear a protective lung strategy, a lot of words of marketing words. We protect the lung against what we do to the lung. Protect it from what? From what we do in mechanical ventilation. And now the mechanical ventilation becomes the devil, as if ARDS would be caused by the mechanical ventilation. The ARDS has been recognized because we have the mechanical ventilation which keeps this patient alive. And we use mechanical ventilation simply for one reason, primarily to maintain a viable gas exchange until the nature, God, doctors, whatever you want, take care of the basic disease. And it's possible that in very special case, the mechanical ventilation may be protective if the spontaneous breathing, which is not the panacea, is per se so dangerous that is worse than the mechanical ventilation may apply. Think to the patient with this tremendous respiratory drive, with a negative interstitial pressure, with aggravation of edema, is a sort of cycle for which the mechanical ventilation to stopping that is a good thing to do. Once again, it's question to understand the mechanism, to take care of mechanism. And I think the survival would be a nice side effect of that. When I start, because my generation had the fortune, the opportunity to see the RDS since the beginning, since now. So all the people were playing some role in this field. We were more or less in contact. And this was when I was 27, 20 years old. This was 15 milliliters per tidal volume per kilo, 5 of PEEP, 15 of frequency, New England Journal of Medicine, the Bible at the time. And there were, I was telling my friend yesterday, there were papers at that time who suggested to put preventively, before the mechanical ventilation, 2 tubes in the chest to avoid death because of hypertensive pneumothorax. After 3 days, the patients were exploding. And this was extremely common. Now the pneumothorax is very rare. But in the 70s, the early 70s, late 70s was extreme. When I went with the Dr. Kolobov lab at NIH, I had to measure the performances of the carbon dioxide membrane lung because the ECMO was a failure. We knew already the results of the ECMO study, 90% mortality in treated, 90% mortality in the control. And Dr. Kolobov had wanted to test the CO2 dialysis in COPD patients. You know, the patient watching the television that cannot move, maybe the idea was if we take out the CO2 twice a week, maybe they'll become better. Why not? It was not a great scientific background, there was some applied common sense. In this scenario, I had to test the performances of this very tall membrane lung. And so I was measuring the PCO2 coming in and the PCO2 coming out. by the way, now the people use extracorporeal CO2 removal without measuring the CO2 which is come out from the membrane lung, which is a little bit strange to me. Anyway, but I had already 2 or 3 years in intensive care when I moved in the States, and I wanted to see how the sheep, awake sheep, react to the subtraction of the CO2. And this was the reaction to the CO2. You see that increasing the CO2 removal decrease the ventilation. Here the sheep stop to breathe. So you put a cannula with oxygen, and the people could stay with their lungs completely immobile with the normal PCO2 for hours, days. Not more than 24 hours, I think the study was done, because I was alone to do that. So 24 hours was enough to do the experiment. So this introduced the concept of the lung rest. Why not, instead to bomb the lung with a high pressure and high volume ventilation, why not to keep the lung at rest controlling the CO2? And so we forgot the CO2 dialysis in the chronic lungers that, believe me, sooner or later will come back. And we concentrate on the pulmonary rest. And this, I was telling, at the case number 6 that we did in extracorporeal circulation, I called, because nobody believed, I called some people, including 3 people, including Sir Dennis Melrose from Hammersmith, who invented the submembrane lung and the cardioplegia, was a typical British sir. They look at the patient, they say, no hope, sir, we connect the patient, beautiful results in 4 days. Sir Dennis Melrose took my manuscript by hand, and this appeared on the Lancet after 3 months, without any comment from the editor, any reviewer, anything, just was. And I think I put this one because this was the concept. Avoiding possible pulmonary and extrapulmonary complication of CPPV, which means continuous positive pressure ventilation, through a membrane lung to make lung rest feasible. So there is not much new above the sun about the CO2 removal, lung rest, extracorporeal cytokine, and so on. And the scientific basis was the common sense. If I have the possibility to put at rest one membrane, one organ, maybe the chance of healing are better. And so we start to receive patients from all over Europe, and receiving this patient, we found that most of them could be treated without any extracorporeal. And only the patient with very low compliance, at that time we thought that the compliance was that the lungs were stiff, and the low compliance was just due to the stiffness of the lung. The patient with low compliance had to be connected to the extracorporeal support, with the results for the time which is quite remarkable. And with the group I told you was a Esternia also from Stockholm, from Uppsala, who made the CT in the ponies during anesthesia. I saw a couple of times, and once I said, well, Goran, do you mind if we take the CT in Milan for this kind of patients? Oh, no, go ahead, because we cannot do in Sweden. So one Friday night, paying 50,000 lira in black money to the technician of the radiology, we went to the radiology department. It was another building with a patient, a couple of doctors, and a couple of nurses. We took the CT scan because this patient was sedated, and 2 hours now nobody is absolutely normal, but this when the first time you see that what you believe that more or less is homogeneous in the lung was black up and white down, was a completely revolutionary. So you have to change your model in mind. Our fortune was not to have radiologists around. Because no, it's not there, because the radiologists look at the morphology. Now, the real information in the lungs are in the physics, in the density of the little piece of the lung. So we went to the physics of the hospital, because the radiologists say, well, who cares about ARDS? It's a homogeneous disease, good. We went to the physics, and the physics say, well, easy. Is the density. Density is mass divided volume. Well, right, good. So if we measure the gas with the helium, I can measure the mass of the lung. Yes. And we thought many authors would have done this one, but nobody did before. Just to underline the separation we have with different very branches maybe of the what we call science. So we start with the quantitative analysis, because we wanted to publish this observation without a radiologist. So we start with how much is the gas, how was distributed, how much was the lung mass and the edema. And looking at the distribution, this is the normal man, I think including myself at the time, and these were ARDS patients, and this small part of the lung we called baby lung, but as a marketing tool, was nothing, just to, because the dimension are the dimension of a boy of 5, 6 years old, which has to support all the respiratory burden of an adult. And this part of the lung is completely out of business. All the problems with the mechanical ventilation are here, not here. And still I have many doubts that at the end I will present some new things, which is, I don't know if many dogma that we have are really true, or is it time to rediscuss and to rethink. Anyway, having this, we say, great, we have the possibility to have the anatomy in vivo. So we start to compare the dimension of the baby lung, so or the bad part of the lung, as an example, with the compliance. And we work months, and we say, bigger will be this one, lower will be the compliance. Not at all. Until one August, with a couple of young students, they say, well, let's to change the view. Instead to see the glass half empty, look or half full. Look at the good part of the lung, because we put the gases in the good part of the lung, not in the bad part of the lung. And it come out, this was the first patient, and it's still true, that the compliance is a measure of the dimension of the lung. That means that the specific compliance of the lung, I'm speaking about early ARDS, first 3-4 days, is normal. And this was a completely conceptual revolution for the time, because he explained, as an example, if I use a tidal volume, a normal tidal volume, in a baby lung with a normal elasticity, what do you expect? If I take in anesthesia one boy and I ventilate with 1 liter of tidal volume, I will kill him. And so, with a CT scan, and we understood why only the patient with very low compliance had to be connected to the extracorporeal circulation, because they were more severe. All the story of tidal volume per kilo, measure the patient, and so on, great, is better than nothing. But the kilo weight has nothing to do in the disease with the dimension of the lung. It's a rough attempt to tailor the ventilation on the lung dimension, but are really the right dimension which vary in ARDS. So a 70 kilos man may have a lung of 500, 700, 1,000, 1.5 liters of FRC, and is still ARDS. So, measuring the compliance give you an idea. So the driving pressure now is very fashionable. It's just take into account the compliance, which is better than tidal volume per kilo. It's not the perfection as you have the usual, excuse me, the usual variability. And when we had this kind of baby lung up, we were taking the patient back in intensive care and put in a prone position. Prone position was described, we didn't know, a few years ago on a critical care medicine, one paper on 7 patients, which was completely ignored. They described a good improvement in oxygenation. We start with prone position, just looking here. If I put this patient in prone position, I will have a good perfusion here, and the PO2 will goes up. The PO2 went up, but without planning, just for a young doctor say, well, can I take CT in prone position? Okay, go ahead. My God, this come out, where is my baby lung? So we have to shift another times the concept of baby lung as an anatomical entity to a something functional. And why the density are down? And I fought with my collaborator for months to try to understand why. Because at the end, the hypothesis was that the lung was not water, excuse me, but it was just a sponge. I have a wet sponge, and I have the compressive forces which just compress the lowest part of the lung. So to arrive to this conclusion, we had to do the excuse me, but I know the German. We had to do the regional analysis. So to split all the lung and to see how the mass and the gas were distributed. And it came out quite clearly that what play a role is the compressive forces. And that means also that explains the mechanism of PEEP. And if I have a compressive forces which cause the atelectasis here, to keep this one open where is possible, I need to have a force which is equal or greater than the force is compressing. If I use a big force here, I will overdistend there. No question. Any times we touch the PEEP, we distend one part of the lung to keep another part open. There is no way. PEEP, the real effort is to find the less dangerous compromise. This is the best we can have, in my opinion, on looking at the PEEP. And after years of understanding of the mechanism of prone position, which makes the lung more homogeneous, it came out at the end of this grand study, and these are all the studies before, that clearly tell us that in the most severe patients, the absolute change, you may expect about 10% improvement in survival. That means when the PO2 in a patient moderate severe or severe, that means below 150 of PF, not to use prone position to me now is malpractice, because it's one of the very few things that we have in intensive care of which we know the mechanism, the defect, the side effect, the good things, several studies done, so we know almost everything. And so this is the model that we have, this big sponge, compression, and when I reverse this one, I think the edema or the gas exchange in the space without gravity during the edema should be completely different than we have on the heart, but nobody's interested to test it. Anyway, opening. And how many times you have seen that also this morning maybe I saw some slide, here dangerous, here beautiful, here dangerous over distension. It's wrong. It's simply wrong, because the recruitment occurs in yellow is the volume pressure curve. Here are only 5 patients with a very low recruitment, all with a pneumonia, but behave exactly, it's terrible, as a dogs, American dogs or German pigs, the models that we study, having the recruitment all over this curve, which should make us thinking also now. Because when you say, okay, our plateau pressure is here, 30, what about this part? That means we go back at the end of this presentation with far more than 5 patients, 1 slide, but the message was there. That about 30% of the recruitable lung in the current ventilation is always closed. Unless we do recruitment maneuver, which may be a very stupid thing if I don't play after with PEEP. But if I play after with PEEP, may be even a more stupid thing than using the recruitment. We should have a look at the things our God. Anyway, what we know for sure that in models and in men, the recruitment occurs, and this always one slice is the other putative terrible things is the opening and closing, right? Really, where come the story of opening and closing? Comes on 2 things. The Mead paper, theoretical, 1970, Journal of Physiology, 1 editorial of Lachman on intensive care, and that's it. And some isolated lung of Slasky, saying some cytokine opening and closing. But the concept is great. And we continue to repeat this concept Congress after Congress, saying opening and closing is very dangerous, we have to do the maximum to avoid opening and closing. But really the substance of this concept, I more and more doubt about it. But anyway, this clearly tell you one slice in yellow, the tissue which open up and close up down. In red, the tissue which is kept open. 10 of PEEP, we keep open less than 50% of what has been opened by the inspiration. And even at 15, we have open and closing. If you want, keep open all the lung, because you love this concept, open the lung, keep open, great. You have to use a pressure at least around 22, 23, 24, 25. This is the order of magnitude. 25 means that you are close to the total lung capacity. 9, not me because I'm coughing, but try to take a big breath up to the total lung capacity. Now try to imagine that over that you start to ventilate 15 times per minute for days. This is what we do to the patients. With 25 of pressure, the FRC becomes almost multiplied by 2.5, 3. To avoid this. So, the mechanism of PEEP can be proved, and you know, the recruitability, this was another surprise, that we have some patient. We respond to PEEP and patient does not respond. There is nothing mysterious. I think to respond to PEEP, the patient has to have a collapse. The response to PEEP is the other phase of the collapse. The collapse is due to edema. If I don't have edema and I have a consolidation, as here, consolidation means the units are full of something, cannot be opened. Anytime I use pressure, I delay this one, that's it. If I have a spreading of the infection, and I have edema, interstitial edema, I increase the pressure to the lung and I have some regions which become atelectatic. At that point, I may increase, I have a good response to PEEP. So the response to PEEP, at higher PEEP, even the same prone position, makes sense only in patients in which must be the prerequisite of this action to work, which is diffuse edema. That's it. Here, if you do prone position, higher PEEP, whatever you want to do, is wrong. I mean, you just have the side effect of this maneuver without any benefit. And this is when we look at the distribution of recruitability in a series of patients, we found some patients classified as RDS, which is word of communication. If I say RDS, everybody thinks, well, wide lung, low compliance, PO2 not bad, not very bad, PCO2 around 40, 50. But in terms of edema, in terms of recruitability, in terms of distribution, I can have some patients which have just 5% of the lung which may open up. Here, some patients with 30, 40% of the lung. How can we pretend to have the magic bullet for this one? I have to understand the single patient, the characterization of the single patient. And now, I'm fighting with a reviewer at the moment with this because I think that are data for which I doubt that the dogma of open the lung and keep open is seriously worth to do. Let's see, these are a series of, I think, 34 patients. Most of them, this is quite strange, because it's not unusual. Most have severe RDS. Usually the series are mild, intermediate, a lot, small, severe. You have mild, very few, severe. This is the driving transpulmonary pressure. You can imagine this airway pressure for simplicity. Okay. The airway pressure was tested at 30 and 45. So these correspond more or less to 45 centimeter water of driving pressure. And you can see that in the moderate RDS, 100 grams, and at this level, so below 30, everything is already done. Here, in intermediate, you have more, but look here. In severe RDS, after the 30 of airway pressure corresponding to this transpulmonary pressure, you have still a lot of lungs to be recruited. And I stop at 45. If I would be a Brazilian, as my friend Marcelo Amata, I would go up to 65. Maybe with 6.9 of pH, I don't like to do that, but probably you have, at least you have some more gain in recruitment, 3-4% more. But it makes sense. First, at 30, you see that you have a lot of difference between these patients. So I know that if I want to open up the lung, I have to use the tremendous pressure, at least in severe RDS. And why we have so big pressure? And why the pressure is, at the same pressure, you have a different thing to that. Using the same pressure, why I open 100 grams, 150 grams, or 400 grams? The pressure is an intensity property of the system. Is as the heat, is as the temperature. Temperature is the same everywhere. The recruitability is a capacity property of the system. Depends on how big is the system and what is the nature of the disease. how much of the edema is in the interstitium compared to the consolidation. So it's the nature of the disease which conditions the different recruitability. They need still the same pressure. There is another thing to observe, that for the same, if I have a lot of units collapse, compare only one unit collapse, to open up, I have to overcome the surface forces, but also a sort of crowding. If I have a lot of units close, to open this unit, I require more force than open one single unit. Because you have this effect of interdependence between the different units. Anyway, what tells us this one is that for opening the lung we need tremendous pressures. And the same transpulmonary pressure is required to keep open this one or keep open this one. Maybe this one makes sense if the opening and closing is really dangerous. But doesn't make sense this one. No? But still, so the problem of recruitability is a problem of the nature of the disease. For opening, you say, okay, we know that open up and closing down. They follow two different ways. And you say, why? Because of the hysteresis. Great. I can hysteresis Tom mix. What means hysteresis? Means that the force that I have to open up, that use to open up, is greater than the force that I have to use to keep open at the same level. And you see that the only compressive forces are due to the gravity, are equal. Move the thorax, require exactly the same force. What changes? Here I have to overcome the surface forces. And what are the surface forces? Are just the attraction that we have between the water molecules with the hydrogen bonds that I have to break, to open up the lung. That's it. That tells you another thing, that the lack of surfactant in terms of distension is protective, because I have to spend part of the energy I put for the molecules of water, not to distend the lung. Anyway, what is really important so far as part of airway pressure? What is important to me is the transpulmonary pressure. Not for me. I don't care about the transpulmonary pressure. It's the nature invented this one. If I want to know how much is the distending force of the lung, I don't have to look at the total force. These are the amount of pounds that you spend to move the system of 1 liter. You spend 5 for the thorax, because the thorax is soft, and 25 for the lung, because the lung is stiff, is small, and so you reach already this. That means 25 of transpulmonary pressure. If you ventilate one animal for 24 hours with this pressure, you kill the animal. So it's a little ventilation. 15, no problem. But you have here 15 in the thoracic space, which means heart, blood vessels, and so on. Great problem hemodynamic, great problem with the lung. If I don't measure, I don't know it. There is no question about it. I know that people doesn't like to measure the transpulmonary pressure because it requires a catheter, requires an additional work. So, well, I grow up without the transpulmonary pressure, why should I put more effort? I think I would like to be cured by a patient, by a doctor, who knows what the transpulmonary pressure is, and maybe take some consequences. We have a catheters, the normal catheters, in which we don't use the gastric balloon, we use the esophageal balloon as a normal catheter that for the nutrition. And here is a series of patients. Look here, the mythical 30 of transpulmonary pressure. Here is about 8 the transpulmonary pressure. Here is about 27. You remember our friend Australians that when they started with the epidemic of the H1N1 and they published a paper on the extracorporeal rescue because of terrible resuscitation. And you read that who were the patients? Most of these patients were obese patients and pregnant women. Why? Because the Australians very follow these rules. 30 is okay. With 30, a pregnant woman, not all, an obese man, not all, but is more likely in that, have a very force to be used for the thorax, and the distending force of the lung is very low. They were just hypodistended. This is the reason why they were so hypoxic. Was enough to go from 30 to 35, 40, paying attention to hemodynamic, and the problem was solved. Which is the difference between ruling a patient with the physiology or ruling the patient with the algorithm in the computer. They tell you, oh, wrong. Or on my foot. This is, anyway. This is very recent, again, you see, when I plot the driving pressure versus the transpulmonary pressure, each patient has a beautiful line. But what counts is the slope, because the transpulmonary pressure divided the airway pressure, the slope, is equal to the slope of the chest wall elastance to the total elastance, which in physiology is 0.5. Is here maybe 0.2 to 0.8. That means you have to multiply the airway pressure for one of these two to understand what is the transpulmonary pressure. So for 30 of transpulmonary pressure, I may have 30 times 0.2 is 6, or 30 times 0.8 is 24. Is the difference between the severe hypodistension and lethal overdistension. After that, this how originate, which was new, but once I was asked by the Turkish to do a conference about the primary and secondary ARDS, I never was involved in that, but we were measuring the esophageal pressure, and so I asked, okay, go see how it is. And what's come out that the primary ARDS, that means pneumonia, the problem is into the lung, while in peritonitis the problem is the abdomen, which is not a great discovery. But some people get very upset because of this paper, so start a lot of controversy. Controversies of what? If I have a peritonitis, I expect my chest wall elastance increases, that means it's less elastic. And if I have a pneumonia, the chest usually is normal, and the problem is into the lung. And you remember all the barotrauma and volotrauma. Once again, this is ignorance of basic physiology. Because the stress, which is the tension that I put in the fibers when I apply a force, is proportional to the strain, which is the lung deformation, with a constant of proportionality, which is called Young module in engineering and specific elastance in physiology. But look, what means specific elastance? Specific elastance is the value at which the FRC double is the transpulmonary pressure at which the FRC double its size. So if I have a man with 300 milliliters and I arrive at put 300 milliliters, I read the transpulmonary pressure, I found around 12. If a man is 3 liters and I rise to 6 liters, I read 12. Because the specific elastance in man is quite constant, which is around 12 centimeters of water. Not in the animals. In the pigs, the specific elastance is about half. And I didn't know that. But we discovered it after a series of pneumothorax. Because if I use 45 centimeters of water in a pig, is equivalent, in a young pig, 25 kilos, is equivalent to use 80, 90 centimeters of water in a man. So they reach the same multiplication of volume, but at a different pressure. But to have this video, I have to use a tremendous distension that we never do in clinical practice. So how can you explain this? And this is the post-hoc analysis of the ARMA study. Well, even the patient with a better compliance, they have different mortality. And here we come with the homogeneity and dishomogeneity. If I have to break this one and apply a force, what do you expect I break? I break here where I have a force concentration. I break in the angle where is a maximum force concentration. You know, in the airplane, they make round the window after the concentration of forces for some explosion on the plane. This was known also by the physicists 2,000 years before Christ. They were preparing the boat, avoiding the stress concentration, which happens also in the lung. And this is the famous paper on read. How many times in the Congress you have seen somebody saying, it has been shown that if you apply 30 centimeters of water, locally you may reach 140 centimeters of water. Have you heard that? I have heard dozens of times. This is a theoretical paper of mine, which I suggest you to study, not to read. But to study, that means having a piece of paper, I mean my time, pencil, and time. Time is a crucial point. And you say, okay, let's see, I distend with the transpulmonary pressure maximally in my lung, okay? I am at a full total lung capacity. That means all the fibers of the lung are completely distended. Great. Each fiber, because the lung has its own skeleton, you remember the beautiful slide that I need about it, that slide, all the network of the lung is interconnected, but if each fiber takes its own load, the load, the total load, is shared in piece. If I close one, the fibers neighbor to this have to sustain the load that was taken before. Let's see, I have 1 kilo, which is suspended with 3 cords. Each cord takes 333 grams, right? Now I cut 1 cord. My load, which is the airway pressure I put, is exactly the same, but the fibers have to take half a kilo. Now I cut another one. I have now 1 fiber, 1 kilo. The total load is the same, but distribution has been different. And me say, okay, if the volume, this one is 10, and this volume without gas become 1, as the stress is expressed not through the volume, but through the surface, to transform the volume to the surface, I have the difference in volume elevated to the power of the 2/3. 10 divided 1 is 10, elevated 2.3 is 2 divided 3 is 4 point something. 4 point something times 30 becomes 120, 130 of pressure. This is what's written in the book. Nothing to do with experiments. Was a beautiful intellectual exercise at the extreme consequences. We try to measure using with this criteria. If I have a lung which is homogeneous, the neighbor units should have the same distension because the lung should be equal. If I have one unit which is double than the other one, means that there is some maldistribution. So looking at all pieces of the lung with a quite rather complicated algorithm, it took a couple of years to put it together, we come out with this, that at the interfaces, as is logical, which are in red, here the pressure is multiplied. How much? Not 10, but around 2.5 is easily. That means if I applied 10 of transpulmonary pressure, which is well tolerated in normal lung, but I have 40% of the lung which is in this condition, here my transpulmonary pressure becomes 20. At 20 of transpulmonary pressure, I am the limit of the total lung capacity of some unit. And to break the lung, I have to reach this level. I don't break the lung when I breathe normally. I have to go at the anatomical limit of the lung, which are linked with this pressure. And arrive at the last part, which is one on which are working now quite heavily. And start as a bashing. Same lethal ventilation, all death. 75% provided as a continuous strain, PEEP, pigs in perfect health. What is the difference? If you take the paper of Dreyfus in ADC, it's written, it's not important the PEEP or not PEEP, it's important this level. The problem of the Dreyfus paper is that this level was reached, was so high that all the rats exploded. These were 2 days experiments. Even here, after the first 6 hours, you don't see anything. If you close the experiment, you go to sleep, you say, okay, this 2.5 hour strain is absolutely innocent. If you go, and we limit to 2 days, to 2 days and a half, you see this problem. And so this is the problem which is in discussion, no? Because when you put energy, is the tidal volume, is the pressure, all this, tidal volume, pressure, flow, and rate are all converged in the mechanical power that I put into the lung. If I don't have movement, if I don't kick, I don't provoke any lesion. So, volume, pressure, respiratory rate, flow, all these have been described as possible cause of villi. But all represent different parts of the same problem, which is the energy load, which multiplied by time becomes mechanical power. Okay? Pressure times volume is force times movement, time force for respiratory rate is power. Look here, here there is a big confusion. It took a lot of time to try to clear the idea. Because, as an example, you take the paper of Amato, the paper of driving pressure, you read the paper and say, okay, which PEEP? Oh, to have the PEEP of 0 of the PEEP of 25 with the same driving pressure is the same thing. Even if PEEP, the energy due to the PEEP, the cyclic energy is 0, but the PEEP put the fibers in tension. Let's see 0 PEEP. And this is simplified. Now, if I put the flow, here we have the curve, now a translation of this area. Anyway, I increase up and the energy load is this area. Now, let's see, I put this level of PEEP. Now the energy load is this one, but include also the energy I need to start from this level. I have to put enough to start with the inflation. I cannot go starting from the PEEP level as written in a physiology book, which moves the axis of the PEEP. Here, the same thing. First, I have to provide this energy, because the energy is pressure, not delta pressure. The absolute pressure times the delta volume. And so, my dear friend, I'm quite convinced that the PEEP is not protective. PEEP is protective just because it's associated with the decrease of tidal volume. It's the tidal volume which kills, the first killer, and the pressures. After this, which has been proven in hundreds of experiments, look here, this is the motion equation. Luigi presented this one. This is the distance in the lung, elastance, tidal volume. Frequency, the resistances and flow are the pressure that I need to move the gas. PEEP is the pressure baseline. If I don't have any movement, the total pressure is equal to PEEP, right? If this is 0 and this is 0. Now, if you want to know how is the associated energy, I have to multiply each of these terms times the lung distortion. This is a pressure, this is a pressure, this is a pressure, times the delta volume. And you notice the first thing. If I multiply delta volume here, it comes out that delta volume goes to the square. This is the coefficient to go from centimeter of water and liters to joule. This is the frequency. And this is the lung distension, square of tidal volume. This what moves the gas, EA, and this what keep open. All these represent the energy. Now, we went to look at this equation as it is, as an example with experimental animals in which we change the energy and we measure the energies just looking at the volume pressure curve, the real dynamic curve that you see in the ventilators like this. And it's quite impressive. That means that they can preview what will happen in humans. We did also in humans as well. I can simulate whatever I want. I can also understand in the component of Vili how much is the role of tidal volume, of the airway pressure, of the PEEP, of the frequency. And this is just very preliminary. As expected, this is tidal volume and driving pressure. They follow exactly the same, are the same things, because are linked by one proportionality constant, which is the elastance. They goes up with a square. That means if I double the tidal volume, the mechanical goes from 7 to 12, the mechanical power goes up 4 times, because goes up with a square root 2. This is what is the PEEP. The PEEP contribute by, the contribution of PEEP is much lower. And this is the contributor of the respiratory rate. That means if I double the tidal volume and I have the respiratory rate, I don't get the same number in terms of mechanical power. The tidal volume always wins. And what you're working now, because the number we have now are around 100 millijoule per minute per milliliters of lung, to see if we have the same values throughout the mammalians. taking in account the specific elastance. Because if we come out, this can be implemented in a ventilator in 10 minutes with a good engineer. Doesn't cost anything. But the ambition is to have something in which, okay, if you reach this number through a manipulation of this, not just changing one. Here is changing one and keeping the other fixed. But I can change altogether. We knew in the peaks that what's count is the package, below or greater than some threshold. But if we were able to identify some threshold, this to me will be the real indication of the extracorporeal support. And so at the end of the story, just putting together three signals: inflation, homogeneity, a PET. This is how ARDS is made. Mild, white means homogeneous, well inflated, and non-inflamed, normal. If I put this one in a randomized trial, it will just mix everything. Here, what can I protect? Yellow is inflamed, homogeneous. Red, inflamed, non-homogeneous. In a gray are all gasless. Look at this lung. And intermediate, I think they should be divided in mild, intermediate, which is not ARDS, I think, mostly, and moderate severe. That means 150 should be the splitting point. These are the real ARDS, and I have to summarize all this in one sentence. I spoke about this one, which is less energy. And this is what the doctor does. If he won't make the lung accepting all the stupid things that we do at a ventilator, accepting more, we have only two systems, which are makes more homogeneous lung, which are the prone position and the PEEP in a patient in which are present the prerequisite of prone position and PEEP to work. Thank you for the attention.